Hi, everyone. This is Jason Bierak of Wall Street from Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from Main Street podcast interview. Today, Mo Dawood and I are joined by a very special guest. He is a returning guest. It is investor, speculator, best-selling author, and founder of Casey Research, Doug Casey.
Nice to be here with you guys.
All right, Doug. Our first topic I want to discuss is capitalism. And ever since the 2008 financial crisis, capitalism has a bad name now, a bad image, and a bad brand, basically. And whenever people talk about capitalism, they tend to connect it to Wall Street, big bank, bailout, corruption, etc. A lot of people don't think about how companies like Apple, Google, all these other companies that create value for society and for their shareholders and create jobs. So do you believe capitalism has an image or branding problem?
Yeah, there's no question about it. The average person has grown up to believe that capitalism is hard, it's harsh, it's perhaps evil, perhaps a necessary evil at best. It's very unfortunate. Even the word capitalism, most people are unaware of the fact that that word, capitalism, was coined by Karl Marx. So right out of the box, of course, it had the semantic odds tilted against it. And what is generally called capitalism today is, well, you can use capitalism the way Ayn Rand used it, which I think is a much better and fairer way to do it. But I prefer to say the free market, which doesn't have the bad overtones that the word capitalism does. Anyway, the system that we have in the U.S. and indeed all over the Western world isn't even theoretically, even according to a Marxist definition, capitalism, because the way Marx broke down property, you'll recall, was that all property was either a capital good or a consumer good. And capitalism is a system where both the capital goods, that's factories, farms, mines, this type of thing, are privately owned and privately controlled. And of course, consumer goods are privately owned and privately controlled in a capitalist system. The next step down the road is fascism, where although all these things are owned privately, they're controlled by the state. Germany and Italy during the last war were classic fascist systems. Fascism has really nothing to do with jackboots and militarism and so forth. It's an economic system that we have here in the U.S., where you own property from a legal point of view, but the government really tells you what you can and can't do with it. Then next you've got socialism, which allows consumer goods to be owned privately, but capital goods are owned by the state. There really aren't very many socialist systems around today. And then communism, where everything is owned by the state. And, of course, that's just kind of a Platonic ideal. I mean, the Chinese came close to it. Maybe the North Koreans are kind of close to it today. But most of the world systems are fascist systems today. Anyway, I'm kind of a stickler on using words in a precise manner and trying to come up with accurate definitions, because if people don't define their words closely and accurately, then they really don't know what they're talking about, or maybe they're talking past each other because they mean two different things when they're having an argument. So anyway, that's probably more of an answer than you were looking for, Mo, but I had to say that.
And I think, Doug, that the perception there, and maybe it's from all those years of government schooling, and from the mainstream media, where there's no any evil is any profit is evil. Any type of sales job or business is evil. That's just been ingrained in people for many, many years. The social conditioning is just unbelievable, but people don't understand the value creation perspective, like what Mo said. I think the perception, unfortunately, is that capitalism just takes money out of other people's pockets. It doesn't create any value, and that's because of all the crony capitalism that's involved. There's tons of great entrepreneurs out there still. You know, you have all these amazing technologies, and there's small business people that are getting around the rules, that are figuring out how to get things done despite all the government intervention, all the rules, regulations, and high taxes.
Oh, yes, that's totally true. Profit is a sign that you're providing something of value that people want to buy. And if you can't make a profit, it's because nobody wants your product, or maybe they want your product, but you're providing it so badly that you're destroying capital, not creating it. So profit is a wonderful thing, but that's not what people are taught. Perhaps this has partially to do with the growth of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, which are one of the epicenters of the cancers that are growing in Western society today, where these things are huge. People give them lots of money, and college graduates want to work for them because they somehow think they're ethical, because they don't work for profit. They're non-profits. So I'm a profit. Profit is wonderful. As long as it's a free market profit. I'm not talking about the kind of profits that
like Solyndra.
Yeah, exactly. That
government sponsored
get their profits by sucking at the government's tit.
So I don't know if you've seen a video of Peter Schiff when he went to the Democratic convention, and he asked the Democrat if the government should cap or not allow private companies to keep all their profit, and all of them said yes. So it tells you that what the perception people have towards the private sector is that all of them are evil, and that they tend to keep all the profit in their pocket, and they don't create any job, or they don't have any value to society. So my next question is how can we fix this image or branding problem that capitalism has? Is that something that the government should fix, or is that something the private sector that's going to have to go out there and educate people on how capitalism really works and what it is?
Well, as you may or may not know, Mo, I don't believe in the government as an entity. It's not that I am partial to Republicans or Democrats, there's two sides of the same false coin to me. I don't believe in the government as an entity. I don't really think it has a right to exist. So everything that is needed and wanted by people in society could be and would be supplied by entrepreneurs. And the government itself doesn't serve any useful purpose. The government is pure coercion. As Mao Tse-tung said, it comes out of the barrel of a gun. And there's two ways that people can relate to each other, either coercively or voluntarily. And I'm suspicious at best of people that believe in coercion. I believe in voluntarism. If you believe in voluntarism, you want to limit the state as much as possible. I think it should be abolished. Anything that the government does could be and would be done by the free market. So, but I'm afraid we're losing the battle intellectually. Well, not intellectually. People don't care about intellectual arguments. We're losing it emotionally with people. Perhaps everybody is forced to go to a government school, and they're taught by indoctrinated teachers who don't know any better. So they have to. No, it's very problematical. And you look at the way people vote. They put these horrible people in office, whether we're talking about Bush or Obama. So it's and at this point, more than half of the country is living off of the government. I think the official number is 53% of the people get more from the government than they have extracted from them by the government. So of course they're going to vote for the government and support it. It's their daddy.
Yeah, I completely agree, Doug. That was very well said. Now, you talked about intervention in markets, and one of the things that we're seeing here is the stock market just irrationally keeps going higher and higher, and that's after, bad earnings reports, guidance is not being raised. Do you think global central banks and central planners will allow the stock market to crash without further intervention and more QE?
Well, the establishment, the state, these people, of course, they want to see a high stock market and such, but the only way they can actually promote this is by creating more money. And at this point, they're creating trillions of dollars per year. I mean, certainly since 2007, this has gotten totally out of control. They've just created trillions of currency units, not just here in the U.S., but all over the world, in Europe and China and Japan, everywhere, quite frankly. So this is the main reason why stocks have been going up. There's all of this purchasing media floating around, and the people that own it, many of them anyway, understand that it's an unsecured liability of these governments, so they want to put it in something real, something that won't dry up and blow away. So the stock market's been a big beneficiary of it. Commodities have been a big beneficiary. Real estate's been a big beneficiary. And they've been driving down interest rates to stimulate the economy, too. So even the bond market's been a big beneficiary. That's why, as I look around the investment world today, I can see almost no bargains. Well, there are a couple, but there are not many, not among conventional investments.
And I have a follow-up question, Doug, to that. You talked about all the different asset classes, and I think one of the most main arguments of finance that we are all taught is that markets are supposed to be non-correlated. So when the stock market is going up, the bond market is supposed to act contra to the stock market, and the commodities market and real estate market are supposed to act differently to the other markets. And you're seeing almost every market go up now, although commodities have not really gone up. But all the other markets are all going up at once. Do you think that goes right in with the money printing and the fact that the central planners want this market to do this and that market to do that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. All this money being created is flowing into various markets. And eventually, I think, being soon, we're going to see explosive levels of inflation on a consumer level as this money drains out of the financial markets and evidences itself down at your local corner store or the Walmart, for that matter. So the price of everything is going to go up. To me, the dollar is a hot potato. It's a trading sardine at best. And I pity the poor fools that are buying bonds. This is what's been called return-free risk, owning bonds at these levels. I remember, well, many people remember back during the early 80s when government bonds, long-term government bonds, were yielding 12%. Short-term government paper was 15, 16, 17% even. Nobody wanted it back then, but they're all piling into it now with interest rates approaching zero. It's a classic bubble in the bond market today, similar to what real estate was in 2006, similar to what the stock market was in 2001. The bond market is the biggest bubble of all right now, and it's going to be a disaster when it pops. Well, but disaster for the people that own the bonds.
And I don't think they want the stock market to crash for political reasons as well, because a lot of people tend to think that if the stock market going up, then that means the economy is doing well. But that's not the case. If you look between the numbers and see the real unemployment rate, the real inflation rate, the economy in this country is actually not doing very well. And the stock market going up is because the Federal Reserve is pumping all that money into the economy and giving low interest rate to the Wall Street banks and the other big banks around the country.
Well, I completely agree. Just looking around, I really ask myself why anybody today even wants to get into business. The hurdles that you have to jump over, the taxes you have to pay, not just on income, but on fees and all this type of thing, the legal fees that you have to pay to stay in business, the liabilities from every source. No wonder there are fewer and fewer entrepreneurs in this country all the time. So I'm quite pessimistic about the direction that the U.S. is going, and I have been for some years. Now, that's not to say that things aren't, despite that, going to get better, and that's for two reasons. Number one, the average guy, even with these immense stumbling blocks that the government puts up, which idiotically the average guy thinks are for the good of society. That's another whole other subject. But still, the average guy tries to produce more than he consumes and save the difference, and that builds capital. So that's going to continue, hopefully. And the other thing is there are more scientists and engineers alive today than have lived in all world history put together previously. And they're inventing things. They're figuring things out. Technology's improving. So hopefully capital is going to continue being built, and technology will make things better. It's just that there are no guarantees. I mean, things could be much better than they are today.
Yeah, you have a good point. And despite all the increasing regulation and intervention by government, we still have some part of free market going on in this country, like the shale boom that's going on in the United States. And also the technology sector is still innovating, still coming up with new things to improve our lives. So despite our limited economic freedom in this country, there's still a lot of good things that's happening in this country. I don't know if it's going to be enough to overcome.
I just hope that the U.S. government doesn't decide to create a Department of Technology to quash the technology boom. And I'm surprised that the Department of Energy hasn't done more than it has to quash the production of shale oil and gas. But the NGOs are doing as much as they can to prohibit that.
Yeah, there's conflicting legislation about the shale boom. I mean, the shale boom is really, it's lowered the U.S.'s trade deficit, I think, quite a lot in the last couple quarters. And it's actually preventing the U.S. government from running as big a budget deficits, although they are still very large. But the total budget deficits have come down thanks mostly to the shale boom and the fact that, Europe is even more of a basket case than the U.S. is. And companies are bringing their manufacturing over here to the U.S. thanks to the cheaper energy prices.
Yes. I mean, Europe is, from an economic point of view, a zombie. It's like the Walking Dead. It's completely rife with socialism and welfarism. It's just totally corrupt. I just don't see a future for Europe until the thing collapses and people are forced to rebuild something new at this point.
Yeah, so, and there's a very large underground economy in Europe developing too, with their very high unemployment rate. And then you see guys like Paul Krugman and all these other mainstream media financial people and mainstream Keynesians, and they're coming out and they're blaming the free market and our an Austrian School of Economics austerity plan for Europe. And I don't know any Austrian who endorses when the federal government reduces their spending, who wants the private sector taxed more. I mean, it's not gonna incentivize the market to clear. It's not gonna incentivize the private sector, the businessman, the entrepreneur, to start investing in creating jobs. You need those lower taxes on the private sector when government spending is cut. Otherwise, it's useless.
Of course. I mean, all these governments in Europe are cutting spending somewhat, but they're also raising taxes. So one thing is good, the other thing is bad. The net is neutral at best. I mean, what they've got to do is not just pare back government a little bit, but cut it away with the meat axe and pull out these regulations and laws and taxes by their roots and abolish them, not just modify them or cut them back a little bit. But they're not going to do that until the whole system collapses. And there's a good chance that'll happen. It's going to be fascinating to watch and see how this evolves. This is why I continue to be a big fan of the Orient. It's much freer and more unregulated and much lower taxed than the West. So they'll continue to pull further and further ahead.
And that's a great point. And I want to shift gears here and talk about the commodity sector, especially gold. Now, gold hasn't done very well so far this year. And even after when the Federal Reserve rolled out QE3 and QE4, not much action going on in the gold market. And a lot of people think that the gold market needed an Armageddon-type event to actually start a rally again, like the Lehman collapse or something like that. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well, I don't really I don't trade gold. To me, at this stage of economic development, where the world is today, you've got to view gold as the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability. And it's not like it's at giveaway levels today at $1,400. It's had a wonderful run over the last 12 years from $250 to $1,400. I mean, that's a superb performance. So it's not like it's cheap today, but I think it's good value. And I think it should be the foundation of of people's financial well-being. They should have a significant amount of their wealth in gold. It's cash in the most basic form. It's cash that can't dry up and blow away or be inflated out of existence or defaulted on. So it's very important that the average guy own gold in the form of coins in his own possession. And the same goes for silver, which is a different proposition, similar, but different. It's more of an industrial metal. I think it's got potentially more upside potential than gold does. So that's the way I feel about those things.
And gold and silver, Doug, cannot be created by a keyboard stroke by Ben Bernanke or Mario Monti or any of these other Keynesian central bankers who decide that, their inflation targeting is not high enough. They want to give banks and speculators more free money to speculate with to go chase yields and move the markets higher. My question, though, my next question, is commodities related. And, we've seen, you mentioned earlier in the interview that the commodities market has benefited from inflation, but it's also the most, I would say sentiment-wise, the most bearish it's been in a long, long time. Do you think the secular commodities bull market is over, or do you just think this is one of those secular bears within cyclical bears within a secular bull?
Well, it's a question of which commodities, I guess. I'm less bullish on industrial commodities, things like iron ore and molybdenum and copper, for that matter.
Yeah, me too. I agree.
And when it comes to the agricultural commodities, I watch agriculture and the way it's evolving, and I'm kind of concerned. There's been a lot of things in the news about genetically modified organisms, and it's very controversial. On the one hand, if we didn't have GMOs, there'd be a lot of people starving to death today because yields would be a lot less. On the other hand, personally, I prefer not to eat them because we don't really know what effects these things may have. I'm also concerned about the gigantic monocultures of corn and wheat and soybeans. Mile after square mile of these things are next to each other. It seems like some virus is eventually going to take advantage of that and destroy all these things that are all genetically similar thanks to the improvements that, and I use that word in quotation marks because it's a double-edged sword that companies like Monsanto has made. Anyway, I think we're on the cusp of, a number of big things happening. What I do with speculative money in the commodity field, well, I'll tell you what I am doing. I'm not in the commodities markets buying and selling in Chicago or New York, but I own farmland. I like cattle, actually. That's my favorite commodity at this point. Beef is very underpriced relative to other commodities, and I like the fact that every year, every mama cow has a baby cow, and 2 years later, the female baby cows reproduce, and so it's kind of it can be a nice business to be in from that point of view, that compound interest, especially with beef prices, in my opinion, being quite low. So, like I said, I'm not speculating in commodities. I'm treating them kind of like a growth business.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And I think something you mentioned on with the GMO foods is also this food. It might be, it is going up in price. It might be a little bit cheaper than the healthier food, but this food, a lot of it has no nutritional value. So you're eating food that's like very high in calories or very high in fat, and you don't know what the modification is going to do to it. It's not the regular crossbreeding that was done with multiple plants or with a bee pollinating or something cross-pollinating the plants. So there's just not a lot of empirical research on it, which does worry me as well.
Yeah, of course, I tend to discount hysteria that's generated by the greenies about this type of thing. But still, I like to look at the facts, and there are allegations that some of them are quite reasonable that I haven't seen sufficiently proven or disproven. But this is a good reason to become wealthy personally so that it doesn't have to affect you personally. You can buy high-quality foods. And it is kind of concerning to me as far as the average American's health is that everything that he eats that comes in a processed form seems to be made from either corn or soybeans, and just doesn't augur well. I mean, most of them are fat.
I have two final questions here, Doug, and they're Bitcoin-related and then bail-ins, and they kind of tie in with each other. Do you think Bitcoin and its users will be targeted by government, central planners, and central bankers because it threatens their monopoly on money?
No question about it. I'm a big fan of the idea of Bitcoin, but I'm not convinced it's going to last because, the Bitcoin is it's a nice medium of exchange, but it's not a store of value because a Bitcoin doesn't have any use or value in and of itself. That's why gold and silver have always been preferred monies in the past. I mean, they're each one of the 92 naturally occurring elements. And Bitcoin's a very interesting fiction. I'm all for it. I just don't think it's going to survive in the marketplace. And the other thing, over time, because people say, well, you can't inflate Bitcoin to more than, 21 million Bitcoins or something like that. But eventually there'll be 100 Bitcoin lookalikes. And that's kind of another subtle form of inflation, things that are just like it. But on top of that is the fact that the state doesn't like competition. And the government is going to do everything it can, like perhaps prosecuting merchants that take Bitcoins in exchange and God knows what else. So I'm all for Bitcoin. Its favorable aspects, but I hope that there's a Bitcoin version 2.0 that somehow solves the problems of that I've mentioned. But the government will always be its enemy, of course, just like the government's the enemy of gold and silver themselves.
Yeah, that's a good point, Doug. And I'm a big fan of competing currencies, too. I think the market should figure out what is money, what it wants to use best in what situation. but they're just not going to allow that. I think Bitcoin users are going to be targeted, and I just don't think that Bitcoin has any kind of store of value, at least as of right now. It has to have some years of history of proof. And then what happens if the internet does get shut down or regulated, or they can figure out a way to track Bitcoin more accurately? Then Bitcoin's not going to provide that anonymity and the ability to diversify that people think it will.
Yes, it's very problematical. I mean, I can see how I think that as we speak, Bitcoin's trading at around $150 or something like that. It's been all over the place recently. And I can see that, perhaps as many, many millions of more people, different places in the world, come into the market, it could go higher. But, I don't want to speculate in it at these levels.
Yeah, I think it was a great speculation about a year or two ago. Trace Meyer almost got me interested in speculating, and Jeff Berwick too, but I didn't pull the trigger back then. I was buying more silver-related investments because I just, I'd rather have the silver in my hand, to be honest. I just trust it a lot more.
That's right. And the market always presents new opportunities. So the key is to keep your eyes open for something that could be the next mania, like Bitcoin.
Well, I think there's a lot of good technologies that are out there, like 3D printing, robotics, so I'm very optimistic about the American entrepreneurial spirit still. But let's ask my last final question, and then we'll let you go. This has to do with bail-ins. Do you think there will be more attempts at these bail-ins in the Western G7 countries where depositors are screwed over and FDIC rules could potentially be ignored? Or do you think the potential of riots and marches on D.C. would prevent the people in power from attempting a Cyprus-style bail-in?
Well, I can think of a lot of reasons why we could have riots and worse in the future, not just in Europe, but all over the world. It could be like what happened in the 60s on steroids, because the world economy was booming then. Now it's in the opposite mode. And as far as bail-ins are concerned, all these governments are bankrupt. All these central banks are bankrupt. Sure.
Sorry to interrupt you, Doug, but they're printing the money right now, and the consequences, it's like in Genzo Parsons dying of money. We're in such the early stages of this inflation, maybe an early stage of a crack-up boom, where the money printing is only really rising the asset prices, and you're not really seeing humongously bad consumer prices yet. So they might think that they can get away with this printing for a lot longer, and then they've completely screwed up the interest rate signals, which is I would argue the interest rate is one of the most important things of capitalism, and letting the market set the interest rate correctly, because that decides if an entrepreneur or a speculator should invest in more business opportunities or if they should start hoarding cash.
Absolutely. I mean, the only thing that I'm really confident about predicting is chaos, economic chaos and financial chaos, because the people that are in control of the world's governments and financial systems, they're really criminals. Whenever you have a force-based system, it always draws criminal personalities towards it. So these people are starting to come out from under their rocks, and they're not even acting like they're not even pretending that they're social people anymore. These people are sociopaths. So I predict really rough going.
So you think then that they would completely ignore FDIC rules and risk people start marching on D.C. or something like that? Because I know, even with the Madoff scandal, I think the people who got defrauded in the Ponzi scheme eventually got a lot of their money returned, not just from the trustees, but the government just printed it and handed it back to them, right? So
I don't know how much of, I don't know if the government had anything to do with actually returning money to the people from the Treasury. I don't know. Is that a fact?
I believe a good amount of money was returned to them, but I'd have to check on that again. But I do think that they will probably, the FDIC people, if they completely ignore the FDIC rules, I think there probably would be marches here on D.C. or in state capitals, and because the depositors, that would be the final straw. Because there's already people who are like extremely underemployed, who are living paycheck to paycheck, who are on government programs. There's already just a lot of pent-up anger and frustration. And if their bank accounts, went to zero, or they they got a bailout and other people they didn't get a bailout, and other people didn't have their money taken from them who had more money in their accounts, like in Cyprus. I think that could be, one of the final straws to where there was humongous civil unrest here.
Well, the average American has lots of debt, but he doesn't have any cash. So, FDIC is supposed to cover you up to $250,000. So the thing is, I'm sure that they'll cover the little people, and it's the little people that march. People that have over $250,000 or even over $25,000 in their bank accounts are hardly going to turn out into the streets from their suburban homes, which are being foreclosed on. And I don't know who it's going to be. It's good. It's unpredictable, and it's going to be chaotic.
So that goes in into people need to diversify internationally and globally themselves, their assets, their cash. Is that the type of thing that you would suggest then for people if they have the net worth and the financial IQ to do so?
Absolutely. This is your biggest risk today. I keep saying this is as much risk as there is economically and financially. Your biggest risk by far is political, because your government sees you as a milk cow, and if necessary, they'll treat you like a beef cow. So you've got to diversify yourself politically and geographically, and that'll solve a lot of your economic and financial risks simultaneously. So that would be my parting advice to people. It's to stop thinking like medieval peasants, rooted to one place, pretending they're plants. It's not a very good survival strategy.
Well, Doug, we appreciate your time, and thank you for coming on for another podcast. People want to find out more about what you do, they can go to kcresearch.com. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And tell our listeners about your new book and some of your other ventures that you're working on that you might want to talk about.
Oh, I just published a book called Totally Incorrect, which I take all kinds of subjects, everything under the sun, and kind of debunk the prevailing wisdom or lack thereof. And they're kind of fun essays and interviews. So I'd urge people to go on Amazon or wherever and get a copy of Totally Incorrect. And I'm working on some novels because, I've done this financial economic thing for long enough, and it's kind of preaching to the choir at this point. So I'm working with the Confederate on doing a series of novels that should be suitably outrageous. But in the meantime, in between time, I think people will enjoy that book, Totally Incorrect.
Okay, great. And for all our listeners out there, we're having a free silver giveaway on our website, www.wallstreetformainstreet.com. So go to that website and check it out and subscribe to our site, and you automatically become eligible for a chance to win an American Eagle silver coin. So check it out. So, Doug, thank you.
Thanks, Mo. Thanks. It's good to talk to both of you guys.